Peter, would you say you're a scientist of sorts? Because it's like
yes,
you're so focused on empirical evidence.
yes. To discover it, you have to look at what is here, investigate it, and discover what it is. So it's pure science.
And there's not like in any part of your history, as it were, a reliance on other people's explanations or observations.
Well, I've been interested in what people have to say. Before I had a deep understanding myself, I looked at what other people had to say in case anything they had to say felt valuable, and I could look into it for myself. But the important thing is to see for yourself. It's useless. Other people's experience is useless for you unless you see it for yourself. Only what you see for yourself is powerful for you, is transformative for you.
What is your sense of notion of glimpse?
Of what?
Glimpse, that there's an actual glimpse.
Of course, there's nothing but glimpses.
Well, there's an initial glimpse, which is like the real seeing of what this is.
True.
But
All glimpses are the seeing of what this is, and everyone has glimpses all the time. They may not be appreciated for how valuable they are, though. Nothing but reality is ever being seen, so of course people are actually having glimpses of it. Profound, deep experiences of it. But I would say most often when people are in a habit of orienting their experience in terms of an interpretive framework, any glimpse of experience that doesn't conform with their interpretive framework, they may think of as some kind of a lapse or some kind of a distraction or some kind of a drifting off or a daydream or hallucination or who knows what.
well, I thought this was beyond concept.
It is. It's completely beyond concept.
Conceptual.
Yeah, that's the point. But again, most people seem to be in the oriented to their experience in terms of their interpretive frameworks, which is essentially conceptual, whether or not it's being held consciously.
So there's not like a major glimpse or a
Well, sure, there can be. I mean, every glimpse is a genuine glimpse, and any glimpse can be major. What makes a glimpse major is more the appreciation or the recognition by the glimpser than the experience itself. Nothing but reality is ever being seen with absolute profundity.
But it's accompanied by so much other stuff that it's, the way it seems.
Well, the other stuff is also reality, but again, it's a matter of appreciating it in its true context, you could say.
It's true context,
Being as it actually is, as opposed to any kind of subliminal concepts you may have about it.
so it's like opening up the subliminal concepts.
Yeah, well, in terms of orienting to one's experience in terms of those subliminal concepts. To orient to experience directly as it is, as opposed to orienting to it in terms of how you are conceiving it to be.
You think
Yeah. Reality is very easy to see. It's always being seen. Unreality is hard to let go of. Spiritual challenge is not reality. You're finding reality or seeing reality. The spiritual challenge is letting go of one's delusion, letting go of one's fantasies, and recognizing that one's fantasies aren't true. They aren't actual. They're actual fantasies, but they aren't actual descriptions of the nature of what this is. I think a lot of spiritual traditions imply that reality is hard to see, and you have to learn all sorts of elaborate meditation techniques and this and that in order to see reality, which is absurd. Nothing but reality is ever being seen. It's impossible to see anything but reality. So no technique whatsoever is necessary. It's hard to recognize because the nature of what it is so utterly other than the kinds of linear concepts that people hold.
I know you can't say, but you could give an example maybe.
Well, I give examples all the time. For example, in terms of normal human concepts, there's a supposition that there are objects that are separate from each other. They coexist in a space that actually exists, that persists throughout time, that have existed in the past, in the present, and will exist in the future. In actuality, there are no separate objects. There is no space, and there is no past or future. So obviously that's a radical departure. It's a radical contrast between those two views. The challenge in spirituality, I think, is people, even if they understand that their interpretations are inaccurate, they're liable to be looking for an upgrade. They're liable to be looking for, something that is similar but different, as opposed to something that's radically and fundamentally completely other. I think the only stymieing thing, the only really confusing thing about actuality is how weird it is by contrast with human conceptions. But it's human conceptions that are weird. They're what has the contrast. Actuality is actual. It's not, there's no problem. It is what it is,
The sense of space is interesting.
Yeah.
It seems as if there's nothing there, that it's all one continuous thing.
Yeah, it's a continuous thing. But what it is and how it is, that is very elusive in terms of pinning it down.
Of what it is comprised of, or what,
No,
you
not
said what it is.
well. Even that it is space. I mean, this is space, and all of a sudden you go to sleep, and what does this space look like then? And you start dreaming, what does the space look like then? You drop dead, and what does the space look like then? So it's all the same space, but space isn't one single thing. Space is the condition of actuality that can appear any way that it can appear, with wild divergence in terms of the, in terms of the seeming qualities of it. The space of the visual field and the space of the tactile field are very, very different. The space of the field of taste compared to the space of the field of vision is very, very different space. And who's to say that the visual space has precedent? That's the real space. It's absurd.
That's interesting, actually, that all these dimensions are actually all one to the same thing.
It's very, very interesting. And that's another thing that's very contrary to human conceptualization. Human conceptualization is that the things are different and they're different things. But it's not like that. Actuality isn't like that. Actuality is infinitely differentiated within itself, but it's only one thing. It never departs from itself. It never becomes anything other than just what it is. So it's a very, very strange condition relative to the way humans hold it to be.
Now, if it wasn't for the interpretation, what else could mask it so strongly?
Nothing.
Nothing. Just the interpretation is quite luring, I guess, or no.
Well, I guess that's addictive, whatever. Who knows? I mean, it's not the interpretation per se, it's the belief in the interpretation.
The belief in the interpretation.
An interpretation is just a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
But when you believe that that hypothesis is, in fact, objectively true, that's when you're bound by it, because that's when you can't see around it. Because if someone tells you that things are different, you laugh at them because you know how they are. Like, no, I know there's space. Were you kidding me? You're nuts. People think they know, which is, of course, the biggest impediment to finding out anything. If you already know something, why would you look into what it is? And everyone thinks they know everything.
Well, that's what the beginner's mind, right?
Sure, maybe.
Yeah.
You've always had the strive to know, so you must have had some sense that you didn't know before then.
Well, I always had a sense that there was more than I was being led to believe. There was more that I was being trained in. I knew that. And so I was very curious, what's up with that? From the time I can remember when I was a small child, the things I was being taught just didn't really seem very, very comprehensive. There was a lot being left out. And at the time when I was a very small child, I was trusting. I assumed that, well, those gaps will be filled in later as time went on. But then I was shocked in the middle of my childhood when I discovered, no, people just don't know. They're talking about this, that, and the other, and they don't, and that's where they stop. They don't look at, they haven't touched so many aspects of the richness of being. So I knew that was there. So I was curious, well, what is this? I knew it was there in an intuitive sense, you could say. I knew it, but I didn't know what it was. So my question was, well, what is this?
Now that you know much more. Like when I say to you, oh, I've had this experience, or I think I've seen a certain something, right? Then you just check with your own experience and see if it matches up.
Sure.
And then like essentially when I see something, then I check with my experience and I say, oh, and it sounds similar to what Peter or someone else was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the important thing is to see for yourself, because what this is utterly beyond what can be talked about. So even if someone's talking about something, you'll understand what everyone's talking about when you see what this is. But when you see what this is, you'll be seeing something utterly different than what anyone has talked about.
Except they talk about this all the time.
Yeah. And with as much accuracy as can be done, but that's not much.
But you can tell that they're trying to approximate it.
Sure.
And that
And I can see the ways in which they're failing. The most important thing in spiritual teaching is to see the ways in which it's wrong. Because that means you know better. That means That means you're seeing. Because anything that can be said is wrong, in fact. It can be very pithy and very meaningful and very relevant, but it's not actually completely true. So like in spiritual traditions, there's several spiritual traditions, a lot of spiritual traditions that are profoundly, meaningful, but they're all wrong. And when you can look at these traditions and see the ways in which they're wrong, that means you know what they're trying to talk about. If you just think they're right, you're halfway there. When you see the ways in which they're wrong, that's when you're there, so to speak.
So when I finally see the wrongness of your ways.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. You'll have to work hard with me, because I'm pretty good. But still,
Well, we always seem to come back to square one.
always, there's nothing but square one, and
And,
it's not square.
and you can't say what that is.
You can't say what it is, but you can see what it is, and you can know what it is.
It seems to be like, at least for me, this fluctuation between like hope and then you pulling the rug out, and then I get elated and you pull it out. You know, it's continuous up and then down, up and down. I can like grab onto something, hold it, and poof, it goes away. There's nothing.
There's nothing. There's nothing at all. That's one of the truest things that can be said. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing can be found.
Well, there's what's looking,
Huh?
what's looking,
Well, sure, but it's what's looking at what, and is it looking?
well,
Try and find it.
And what is it?
that's huge.
I didn't say it's not huge. I just said try and find it. Can't be found. I mean, this is inconceivably huge. This is it. This is the big pickle. You know, this is the big pizza.
So Peter, you were talking last time about artists being great artists and great spiritual artists, all of them.
Uh-huh.
So even in like Van Gogh, who you say is like he's the closest approximation, you can still see the error of his ways.
Well, no, he doesn't have ways because he's not saying anything specific. That's different. I'm talking about the teachings or things that he said or his descriptions.
How is it different? Because you're an artist of
Yeah.
sorts.
I'm a con artist.
You're a con artist, fake scientist, whatever, spiritual scientist. Because you're using words and language.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's one of the things I'm doing.
And because you use concepts and metaphors to some extent, you
Right.
break them down very quickly, but you use them
Sure.
quickly.
Yeah.
Right? How is that different from what Van Gogh is saying? Because you're using language, and so you're pointing at something? Is that,
Well,
or you're using ideas? So
ideas have the implication that they're pointing at something. Now, they aren't really, but it's both. So language doesn't point at anything, but language also looks as if it points to something. So an artistic speaker, a talented speaker, will play on both of those. So they'll speak using the meaning of the words, and at the same time they'll speak using the nonverbal aspect of the words.
yeah,
And Van Gogh does that in a sense by analogy, you could say, because his paintings are somewhat representational, which you could say could be analogous to the meaning of the words, and at the same time they're highly textural and vibrantly colored and so on, which you could say corresponds to the non-conceptual aspect of words. So in that sense, you can say they're similar. But all of that is just argument. You know, I said that about artists. An artist, what makes art art is it takes the observer somewhere beyond. It takes the observer from beyond their normalcy. That's, to me, that's the definition of good art. And so in that sense, what I do is art, sure. Ideally.
You mentioned like you having cancer at one point was like the last straw for you to realize or recognize or to fully comprehend whatnot. What happened? What was the?
Oh, I couldn't possibly say.
No,
Don't know.
no, no. Or your idea of it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, the last remaining shreds of my normalcy were stripped away. I thought maybe I was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in this treatment and I didn't know it was going to work. And I was, you know, in sort of extreme discomfort for months and months.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole thing was just, you know, I was forcibly put way beyond any kind of normalcy that I, you know, was used to hanging out in previously.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I mean, that's, like I said, that's the
Mhm.
one way of maybe
Yeah.
approximating it. Yeah, which reiterates, you know, in terms of that model of it, that the problem with spirituality is normalcy. The problem with spirituality is what you think is happening here, what you're used to thinking is happening here. I mean, to the extent that it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's not actually a problem, but if you say it's a problem, then you might be at meetings like this.
Or you could be the joy of having a conversation around this.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you could see, I mean, you could see that your beliefs are incorrect, or you can put yourself in a situation that you're not usually in for X period of time. It's kind of doing the same thing.
It should do the same
It
thing,
could. Mm-hmm.
you know. I mean, a really good yoga technique is to put yourself outside of your comfort zone, outside of your normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, take very strong drugs or go to some place that's very, very foreign, or do some activity that you've never done before and you would never do. Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
To get outside your comfort zone, because it's harder to fall back on your normalcy in that context. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a possibility.
Because we could talk about this for eons, and there might not be, perceived recognition on one end.
Oh yeah, talking doesn't hit at all.
No. How about like going towards fear? That's a good, perhaps a good way.
It might be, it might not be. Fear might reiterate your normalcy. Because fear is always of something, and if it's of something, that means you think there's something for it to be of, which is, you know, your normalcy.
But if your fear is proven wrong continuously,
Well, perhaps, yeah.
then you see that fallacy.
Yeah.
There aren't really any gradations to your experience, right? But I mean,
No.
like you've talked before about like you can look at the person's aura and at different levels, and
Sure.
different frequencies.
Well, just because there's no gradations doesn't mean there's no gradations.
So like
In other words, we're coming up against the problem of describability versus actuality. So I can meaningfully describe it as yes, there's no gradations, and I can meaningfully describe it as yes, there's gradations. I like to argue that there's no gradations because it's more radical in terms of what people ordinarily assume to be the case. But it's not ultimately true. But nothing that can be said is ultimately true. Things are, there's no one way that things are. And there's not lots of ways things are. Things are exactly as they are, which is really, really weird. Which looks from a logical point of view as if it's always paradox, always both and, as opposed to either or.
So like with an artist trying to describe or approximate or it would seem that like the artist has some sort of experience or knowing, some sort of seeing, and then uses whatever the media is to to manipulate the viewer into.
Of course. I mean, that's all anyone ever does. You know, what you do because you have some kind of knowing and you act in certain ways to try to express that.
Yeah, so like.
But an artist, you know, an artist is a good artist in proportion to the degree to which what they're trying to express is beyond most people's normalcy, in my opinion. Getting into the theory of art now. Everybody's a critic.
Stop me drawing.
Oh, critic. Listen to that.
So at a gross level, I could say, oh yeah, I saw this friend the other day, and that's very normal, sort of. Or I could say I had this experience that was like this, I don't know, alien abduction thing or whatever, and that's more of a. It's like if I tell that story, then it's like I'm trying to convey or induce that sort of sense of that more subtle, more abnormal experience.
Maybe. The subtlety is not in its difference, the subtlety is in its subtlety. Subtlety absolutely diverges from simplicity, and interpretations and descriptions depend upon simplicity, depend upon oversimplifying. I recommend you speak from your own experience more and speak less in terms of these thought experiments. I mean, you don't have to, but that's what I recommend.
But there's sometimes I feel like I get notable experiences, and then I bring them up to you, and then most of the time I don't.
All experience is notable. The question is what you think it is.
You mean the way that I think, the way that I try to normalize it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or the way that you do normalize it. The way that you put it as being whatever. I mean, I'm not saying in general, that's the relevant parameter. Experience is always the peak experience. There's nothing that's not the peak experience. All experience is the naked presence of the transcendental absolute. But what you put it, the way you put it, or let's say the way you hold it to be, is the issue, not the experience itself. Experience is all good. I mean you, I mean one.
Sure. So I had a session with Aaron before coming over, and doing something like that. It's very much outside of my normal experience. Like there's a way that I can say, oh, when she's working, it's kind of like when I'm by myself and I do this card roller. I get these certain points. And so that's a normalizing of it. Yeah.
Well,
sort of
that specifically isn't necessarily a normalizing of it. But thinking that what you did is something, and thinking that what you do with the roller is something, and then thinking that those two somethings are similar, is normalizing. Because what she does is not something. What you do with the roller is not something. It's exactly what it is, but it's not something. In other words, to concretize any experience as actually being a certain way. Now, obviously with words, we're stuck with, when you use words to talk about something, you're stuck with the implication that the words imply that it is a certain way. But, to see through that, to see the absolute indescribability of experience is seeing actuality as it is. Absolute indescribability. And subtle, you see, the mind is subtle. The mind can be very subtle, but it can still come up with ways of describing what this is or what happened. Now again, it's slippery because when we talk about it, obviously we're doing that explicitly because that's what words look like. But the point isn't the words you use, the point is your understanding. One's understanding.
Maybe there's like a problem with like wanting to have a shared or a sense of a shared experience.
Yes, that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a big problem. Because you have to imagine such a thing into existence, because nothing like that exists. Once it's your experience, it's your experience, period. You know, and no one else has that experience, or as far as you know, and you can't have their experience as far as you know. I mean, we can say we're having a shared experience, we're sitting in this room, we're talking, but that's bullshit. You know, you're experiencing what you're experiencing. I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. We can use the similar words to describe it, but the words are such generalizations that it's absurd. I mean, you know, just very superficially, you're seeing this experience from over there, I'm seeing it from here. It's completely different. I can't know what it looks like to you over there. You're seeing it with your eyes, I'm seeing it with my eyes. Completely different. I don't know what your eyes see, how your eyes see things. And this is just speaking very grossly materially. But every aspect of experience, of your experience, is yours alone.
Well, besides wanting to have like a sense of a shared experience, there's it seems a desire to have a sense of harmony within experience.
Harmony within experience, with harmony, what harmonizing with what?
Well, oh, okay. So, like in terms of, you know, I'm receiving body work, and there's a sense of disharmony, like physical disharmony, right? And there's also like a sense of there's a sense of separation between experiences or between beings.
Right.
And if there's like a conversation going on, or there are words going back and forth,
right.
And there's an attempt to translate and convey one's experience. And,
right. Sure.
Then there's if that goes on, then there seems to be like a certain harmony at a certain level, you know, and maybe it's just a matter of
well, see, all of that is games we play.
Yeah.
I can play the game of pretending to have, you know, shared experience. I can hang out with people and chat and bullshit and say, hey, how about, you know, beautiful day today, isn't it? And you say, yeah, man, it was great. I had a great time. It's beautiful, man. I love it. What's going on? We do all that stuff, but it's just games we play. Because the actuality is I have my experience solely, and I can't possibly know what anyone's experience is, if it is at all. And so that's the context within which these games are played. And if you know that, then you're free to play these games without being entrapped into thinking they're actual. So like I'm playing a game right now. I'm playing a game. I'm pretending you exist. You know, and I'm making strong efforts to communicate with you. But I know it's all completely absurd. But it's a game I play.
I get a sense that the game that you play, you don't play very seriously.
Well, I played as seriously as any game because I know its true context. So there's only a certain amount of serious it has, which is basically not a whole hell of a lot. I mean, my What's serious is this experience. That's what's serious. That's what's real. And what games happen is just amusement.
It seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess the sense I get, like with you, is different than the sense that I get with most people. Like, it doesn't seem to me um, like you care so much if there's an agreement with what you're saying. Or,
Oh, I don't hear in the least.
where it seems like for most entities I interact with, there is like there's a lot at stake there, you know, and there's
You mean people trying to convince each other?
yeah,
Yeah.
but also like to do this game of like seeming to harmonize, you know,
Yeah.
looking for external cues.
Yeah. And looking for external validation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, all of which is again orienting to the fantasy that that's important, the fantasy that other beings actually exist, and all this sorts of thing. You know, which is oriented to your experience in terms of an interpretive framework. So it's fine. It's just not actual, and so the extent to which it's not actual cuts you off from appreciating what is actual, which would be enormously clarifying and empowering. When you acknowledge that your experience alone is what you have access to, your experience alone is what's important to you, that becomes, you know, the priority. That becomes the, you know, the overarching condition, the overarching importance. And so then once you have that importance established by the fact itself, self-verifyingly, then when you play these games, you see the context in which they exist. You know, I love being social. I love hanging out with people, you know. It's great fun. But I know that it's just me, you know, enacting my own meaningfulness within the context of my being.
What do you mean by that? Enacting your own meaningfulness.
Well, I don't know that I could say specifically.
Hmm.
You know, you could say I navigate towards, or I function towards, to the extent there is such a thing, what I consider interesting or valuable, as opposed to what I don't consider interesting or valuable. As you can say, as an art form, maybe, or as a kind of a, again, this sort of self-expression. And self-expression is intrinsically of what one's values are.
Do you have to sometimes give up your own interests for the sake of others? I mean, to have their own.
No, because if I do, then it's my interest to do so. I mean, I don't have an interest, since because of what I am, there's nothing I can possibly lose, so I have no interest. There's nothing I can lose and nothing I can gain. So I can have provisional interest in terms of, you know, the apparent social situation or the apparent physical situation and things like that. But all of that is very provisional. It's very, you know, sketchy.
Hmm.
Peter, there's no harmony or disharmony in your experience?
There's nothing but harmony and disharmony are the same thing. This is it. You could say it's absolutely pure transcendental harmony, but from a human point of view, what that looks like is both harmony and disharmony. What a human would call it. Everything whatsoever is in perfect equilibrium with everything else.
So I just try to understand in comparison with my sense of my experience.
Uh-huh.
Because like there's like the way that I was putting it before, it seems like, you know, there are assumed disharmonies or
Right.
disparities or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and there's like a navigation towards, you know,
Sure.
resolution or something.
Sure.
But for you, instead, would you, like, as you said, there's everything is in equilibrium with everything else. So it sounds like like you would say, there's nothing but harmony.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's disharmony within
Yeah.
harmony. Harmony.
I can't. Well, see, I'm the same way you are. I also do this navigating towards what I consider more harmonious. But again, it's a game because I know it's not actually more harmonious. It's just I'm pretending there is, or it's, you know, the nature of the quirkiness of my karma that I prefer this instead of that. So I might try to navigate towards it, but I know that it's not, that it's nothing. In other words, nothing hinges on success or failure. It's just a game. It's something to do, something to pass the time, you could say.
I don't know. I have trouble seeing that.
Well, you don't need to see that. See, you know, for yourself. Harmony and disharmony are both your experience. You can't find them anywhere other than in your experience. So your experience is that which is harmony, and your experience is that which is disharmony. And your experience doesn't come and go. Your experience is absolutely inviolable. It's always right here, right now, in fullness. So these games of harmony and disharmony don't actually touch anything actual, which is the field of experience. You know, the field of experience is like a TV screen, and harmony and disharmony is like particular shows that are playing. The show doesn't touch the screen. I mean, you can watch a horror show and the screen isn't scared. You know, you can watch a show about war, people getting blown up with atom bombs, and the TV isn't damaged. So likewise, the field of your experience is this actuality that is here, that is and includes everything, and everything whatsoever that it seems to exist consists of nothing but it.
Yeah, I see that, and yet like it seems like, why wouldn't I identify with certain elements in that?
Well, you're free to. I mean, obviously, it's possible to, and most people do. But the point is to see that it's an identification which is arbitrary, not inherent. In other words, when you identify with something, you're basically pretending, because you aren't actually that thing. You're actually this entirety. There's nothing wrong with identifying, but know that it is identifying rather than thinking that it's actually true, that you are what you're identifying with. That way you're liberated from the being stuck in holding things yourself to be a certain limited way, or holding things to be a certain limited way, while not being able to participate with them any way you want. So you can play these games of limitation and play these games of, you know, identification. But when you know what you are fundamentally, when you do so, you aren't stuck in anything. It's like when you know you're dreaming, you aren't stuck in the dream. You aren't trapped by horrible things or unpleasant things that happen in the dream, undesirable things. Because it's just a dream, so you can laugh.
That's pretty cool. Within the dream, imagining you could do whatever you want once you realize,
Yeah,
fly and have all the sex that you want, or
Yeah.
you could like get lost and pretend it's real. You're like, oh no,
Yeah.
it's not it. But that's pretty cool that the possibility is there.
yeah, of course.
I think Alan Watts, I don't know if I'm correcting it, doing correctly, he's like, out of all the possibilities that we've had, doing whatever we want or having some danger to us, this is what we'd be dreaming of.
Yeah.
Of this possibility of like right now.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see it as a dream.
Well, the way to see it as a dream is just to see that what's happening right now is more than any one way of holding it to be. So you can say what's happening right now is us sitting in this living room having this conversation, or you can say what's happening right now is this transcendental field of experience appearing, or you can say what's happening right now is, these amazing blotches of color that are juxtaposed to each other randomly. I mean, you can say all sorts of different things, all of which are descriptions of the same this, but with a very different implication. Yeah, the interpretation concretizes it to be biased towards holding it a certain way. So we're sitting there and having a conversation. So that interpretation, all of a sudden, bang, there's a whole scenario, there's a whole universe that just is implied in that. Or there's this one field of presence full of dancing, radiant experiential qualities. Bang. A whole implication, a whole universe implied in that. And you can say the descriptions are the same thing. Yeah, the descriptions are the same thing, but which one is true? None of them. And how many alternative descriptions can you come up with? And there's not like there's one that's really true and you're pretending about the others. You're pretending about all of them. Because you don't know. You can't pin it down. It's unresolvable. I mean, the normal human mode is customarily we feel that there's a way that things are, but we can also see them in other ways. And that's fine as far as it goes, but the first premise is wrong. There's no way that things are. There's just an infinite number of ways that it can be seen, but there's no way that it is. I mean, this is what emptiness means. There's no actual way that it is. It's unresolvable that it is actually this or that. It can be seen as many thises or that's as you want. But all these different ways of seeing it are just games that are played in imagination. It's when you think that one of them is actually the winner and all the others are amusing thought experiments. That's when you're lost in delusion. They're all amusing thought experiments.
you can elicit other emotions apart from amusement.
Oh, an endless range of emotions, of course, obviously. You know, any perspective has an emotional implication, and you can have different perspectives on the same situation, which elicits completely opposite emotional. You know, you can see it one way it's wonderful. You can see another way it's tragic. You can see another way it's And the point is that none of those ways are actually the true way. They're all arbitrary.
Earlier you said that the human tendency is try to negate one perspective, or at least as an evolution, you start in one, holding on to one perspective, and then you evolve and you're able to appreciate another perspective, but this has nothing to do with this. It's just like paradox. There's this perspective, but that's not there either.
Yeah.
There are other perspectives, of course, but
There's as many perspectives as you're clever enough to find, but there's no true perspective. No perspective is true. I mean, that's a very simple way to put it. Because what is true is not a perspective. What is true is the condition within which perspectives appear.
sexually feel very different. But just paying attention.
What feels very different from what?
Holding apart to one perspective versus
Oh, yeah. Oh, great.
to
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. I mean, perspectives are, to a certain extent, a denial of texture, a denial of the richness of texture. Perspectives are oversimplification, or textual oversimplifications. The actual texture of experience is infinite, literally infinite. But perspectives collapse that infinity down to a more particularized, range or set that's held to be true, and all any other textures that are omitted by that are just held to be sloppy observation or distraction or daydreaming or something.
I think I've had a few moments today where I was having strong emotions, and notice how typically you get into the reaction. The words and the thoughts are sort of censoring feeling it.
Yeah.
And when somehow, some moments, I was able to just really feel it. Like, it's actually very good. There's richness in it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you really feel experience, it opens to infinite richness. And at that point, you'll be, that moves beyond any particularization of it. We better pause because we've got a ton of desserts out there. I
brought some more.
Oh, good for you. I'm a little concerned that we may have some difficulty not eating these things. So we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Actually, music you're listening to. Oh, no. When you were in the car, yeah. I guess you didn't see me pull up on you.
Oh, no.
I forget what that saying was.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's down the it's a really weird name.
That's what he's called. Yeah. What was the child?
Finally, how did you get there?
Combination of different modes.
You should call up English.
Train, a bus, a cab.
What?
Train, a bus, a cab. Camel ride. Oh, it's so beautiful.
That would be cool if they started having camels.
No, they smell. They do, that wouldn't be cool. They really smell. We rode camels in the middle of the desert in Egypt. Oh. My sister asked me to bring back camel bags. That they make these, you put over to make it like a magazine hold it in the back and then make it cushion.
Wow.
I brought those things back and, the whole house smelled.
Yeah.
Stop thinking.
No, we couldn't get them all.
Where were you? What country?
In Egypt, in Cairo, Egypt.
Oh.
It was fun making the deal though. They're one of those ones where you sit down and have coffee. Then he read the Quran to me for like 3 hours.
Wow.
Asked me to be his bride. Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome. That was a great trip. There were 3 Egyptologists. We were there for 2 weeks. We did like the opening the mouth ceremony.
And what's that?
And the Ankh. That is an Egyptian thing. Then we laid in the sarcophagus and king and then put imagery to a full moon.
That's part of a tour.
Yeah, I mean, we did so many different things. And Slim Sperling was the hipster Steve back then, so they made these pure gold thread capes for us to wear and these triangles on our heads. It was like,
When was this?
oh my God, it was at least 20 years. Yeah. There was such a neglected group of people from all over the world. Yeah. Oh, they knew everything. I was so lit up the whole time that, it's an amazing place. Energetically, I
bet. In Cairo, it seems like Cairo, I mean, the pyramids are right there, so you never leave the energy.
The town is right up on them.
I know.
I know.
The Hard Rock Cafe had just opened up across the street. I mean, there's no street really back then. Oh, it was such a.
You'd think they would have had some sort of green space around it.
You would think. It's so corrupt. It's so corrupt. The woman, she did it for years, so she had all these connections. You would see her handing money to guys to let us in, like we were the first ones to go to Sekhmet's tomb in the morning. And then, they set up this tent and right next to the pyramid, the private dinner thing, so you could see her paying people off.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just tricky to watch all these things go down. And it's still, I mean, you could tell that, well, actually, what was more interesting was when I was in Turkey, because it's like, they were like just picking like old, like, ancient pieces and like piecing them together. You could just see it's like not supposed to go together. Oh, that was incredible too.
Sorry, you can sit down.
Good, how are
We're
you?
doing musical
I
chairs.
thought it was him that you were talking about.
No.
I know. That's what I thought.
Oh, how has your experience been of late?
Good.
Yeah.
Hard to remember. We did planes into the mirror.
Some chocolate.
You and Beth keep on being as happy as ever.
Yeah,
You guys never fight?
never.
Oh, really?
I raised my voice a little bit yesterday to tell him to eat while the food was warm instead of clean it.
What are some of your main activities today?
Oh, we dance a lot. We go to like cat club for 80s night and golf dancing.
Right? Right?
We go to a bunch of shows and sometimes we go to metal shows, not so much anymore.
Uh-huh.
You taking up running?
Yeah. How did you know?
You post.
Oh, I posted. Oh, that's right. I posted that one thing. Yeah. I overdid it someday. I sprinted. Sprinting is like five sprints is like 37.5 minutes of running in your body. And I can run about 30 minutes. But the sprinting, oh my God, between the sprinting, and then we went for a walk for like 2.5 to 3 hours. My legs were terrible. So
Have you
tonight,
recovered now?
what?
Have you recovered now?
Yeah, I'm going to try and run tomorrow. But I like it. I like the endorphins. I'm not very fast, but I do sprint. So it's kind of weird. What?
You don't have to be fast.
No. But the sprinting is interesting because it's weird. You never see people sprint in parks and streets. All of a sudden, I go 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off.
But then he thought he could take me off of some of my hiring managers and down yeah, it's interesting that. Yeah, sometimes you're watching. I go through the internet and try to get some some YouTube or Google News.
I reverse them.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was breaking out in the sweat.
Huh?
I was breaking out in the sweat from the first half.
Oh, that's a new symptom.
Yeah.
Interesting.
A little daydream, but I definitely knew it was a symptom because
Yeah,
nobody else is sweating.
interesting. I don't think I've ever been aware of that before as a symptom.
Well, because it does raise your vibration. It does
Sure,
raise your
yeah.
temperature when your vibration goes up. Your
Sure.
temperature goes up. Maybe I'm a little extra. I used to like it when I first started meditating. I didn't know what it was, but my sinuses would always clear at a certain point. It would
Yeah.
click in my voice.
Uh-huh.
I would partly why I
It's
would like
mostly
to
for the
get.
women.
Sure. I would like to try to understand see what the sort of victim is when it's not as fun.
That's all good. Yeah. Yeah, freedom.
Where are you from?
I was born in Russia. Yeah, I was adopted when I was like 8 years old.
Here?
San Jose.
Oh, here.
Yeah. How about you?
New York,
Yeah.
Russian Jews.
Russian Jews. Okay. Are your parents Russian?
Yeah, I mean, they're American born. They're probably
I've been reading this one.
third generation,
Third generation.
second, third generation.
American writer, Alexi. Have you ever heard of him? He's very good. We got like a collection of his short
I see you're not getting sleep videos like quite a bit.
Today, yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, I think I did another, I didn't notice when it was early enough that, if I come right after hypnosis,
What do you mean you're?
I'm a hearing therapist.
Oh, really? Ah.
And I work in kind of often state already, so by the time I've already done it, then there's like no room. But my time is earlier, so.
Peter, you don't play the chocolates, do you?
Barely. Little bit. Tiny little bit.
Hey, Peter. Is there any like go-to Dzogchen books for you? Like on your mind, like number uno?
Number one, my favorite, well, there's a few. I'd say my very favorite Satsang book is, I think it's called The Masters of the Shangxun Yanju.
Okay. Is that Masters of Awareness or no, this is something else. Okay.
I'll get it and show it to you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, for sure. Check it out. What about your second favorite?
I'll show you that too.
All right.
What is that in your hand? Oh, yeah. Not sure enough.
Is this
Yeah.
one?
Get back in there. You gotta have a little social gathering at house office. Oh, cool.
And then they put this in and.
Sunday. I was gonna mention the stuff.
It feels really you'll pick out of
So we've got an art show in our community on Sunday. If anybody wants to come,
Where is it?
in the Vato. And afterwards, we're going to have a little wine and cheese or something at our house. So if you'd like to
What
come,
time is it?
3 to 5. So yeah, we have to be there until 5. So
So come at 4:30 and hang out afterwards.
that's right. And we can, it's nice weather, we've got a big deck, you can sit out there and enjoy the world. And we'll have some munchies.
So the shows in your community?
Yeah.
Yeah. The community center you were.
Yeah, and then we're gonna meet at our house afterwards. And Irma and I have got art in this. And David, we've got art in this show. David's got an amazing photograph of an elephant seal.
About?
Of an elephant seal and a goldfinch.
Goldfish?
Finch.
Peter, I'd like to, if you don't mind, go back to that discussion about shared experience. But you have talked about intimacy before,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It seems sometimes like when I talk to you, there's like this sense of intimacy, or I'm assuming on your part, it's like I say something and it's like I recognize your experience or sharing your experience or something like that. But that's not shared experience, or that's just you're playing the game.
No, the intimacy, all experience is absolutely intimate. So I see you, for example, I see your body, and this seeing is present in my experience with complete intimacy. There's no gap, there's no distance whatsoever between the experience and the presence of your body, for example. So there's complete intimacy of engagement. But experience is engaged with absolute intimacy. And that intimacy can be responsive if you're with it and not distracted by dumbed down interpretations.
Intimacy can be responsive?
Yeah.
What do you
mean? The intimacy can be interactively responded with by this conversation. So I intimately experience what I experience, and then I respond to it, and then so on. And which includes not just sensory experience, but includes all aspects of experience. So when you feel intimacy with someone, you're feeling that in your experience. The with someone is just a hypothesis. But the intimacy is real. And the with someone is real, but they're your experience. In other words, like for example, my experience of you is entirely in my experience. I can't know whether or not you exist. But you are present in my experience with absolute intimacy. So it's not interpersonal in itself immediately. It can seem to be interpersonal, and it can seem to be an engagement.
Isn't there some small portion of your of whatever the motivation for you to do these sessions? Isn't there some part of that is like a desire to lead others to a scene that is the same as yours, so that there can be some
Well,
sense of shared experience?
no, that's not about shared experience. It's an art form. You know, I fantasize that I'm a revolutionary. I didn't say that. I said a
No, I
revolutionary.
Take it up.
But you say it like that, and it sounds like just a self-indulgence.
I don't know what that would mean. I mean, everything is self-indulgent. I'm completely indulging the nature of myself, which is the nature of myself is as the being that is inclined to do this. So it's total self-indulgent.
But without objectification,
No, of course
which is
not.
what normal self-indulgence involves.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a self-indulgence as opposed to something that would be not that. It's a complete commitment to doing what I consider valuable with no other considerations whatsoever. So in that sense, it's pure self-indulgence. I mean, why do you do what you do? Suppose I wanted to be really empathetic and connect with people and be, a bridge, have a lot of community with people and all that. The operative word there is I want that. So in engaging with that, one is being entirely self-indulgent to what one wants, to one's value system, in enacting whatever elaborate thing it is. Or maybe you want to sacrifice yourself for others and put others before you. So you're being a doormat for everyone and enabling everyone. But again, the operative word there is I want. Everyone does anything because it's their nature to do so. So it's complete self-indulgence.
It seems like there's a difference with your sort of self-indulgence and my sort of self-indulgence. It seems like there's more fantasy, and my input is more assertion of value
Maybe.
about certain subjective parameters.
Sure, maybe.
Being,
But it's just as self-indulgent. It's just self-indulgent in that context.
But it's almost like I have this preconception of how intimacy would look like, or certain conditions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's always a mistake.
What is?
Preconceptions of what intimacy should look like. Your intimacy is always exactly the way you find it, and without one iota of difference from that. And it's never what you expect.
It's like I hold up this ideal, and then I try to manipulate circumstances to fit that.
Hmm. Sure, I suspect, many people do. But the problem with that is circumstances are what they are, and the chances are good that they will deviate from your ideal in significant, if not absolute ways, which is liable to lead to a frustrating situation. Whereas if you didn't have the ideal and just met whatever presented as it was, nakedly, intimately, without the ideal, then you wouldn't need to manipulate. You could just work with that to try to move it in whatever direction you find satisfying for yourself.
Like a majority of human suffering is trying to fit the reality into some idea.
Yes. Imaginary idea. And guess which wins?
I was listening to a podcast on the way here about fairness or justice. They're just interviewing they did this experiment. They put a phone that records, I guess, in a kindergarten, and like 3-year-olds, they already have a keen sense of injustice. It's really funny kind of listening to all of it, and they're not better than that. We were doing the same thing. We get rallied up in politics, but they get on, we farted on you or whatever.
Yeah. All suffering comes from the divergence between the way one imagines things to be and the way they actually are, which will always be different. So if you're expecting things to be the way you imagine them to be, you're always going to be continually disappointed and frustrated. And you'll always be playing catch up, trying to correct. Whereas if you're just with what, if you have no expectation and you're just with what is, then you can work with that without having the extra circumlocutions of having to compare it to what you imagine and be disappointed or frustrated or whatever, and then work with it. Why not just skip all that extra step and just start working with it when it presents itself? I mean, you have to anyway, because if you're not working with what's actually presents, what are you working with?
It feels like there's a fascination with I don't know, fantasies, like what it could be, sort
Sure.
of wishful
Sure.
thinking.
And again, that's all fine, but it's in the nature of hypotheses. Nothing wrong with being fantasizing about what could be, but you can't work from that. You have to work from what is. And you can try to steer what is towards some direction of what you think, what you would like. But you won't, you'll never succeed because again, that you can do that is a fantasy. So whatever your engagement actually leads to, you have to stay with that and steer that.
Yeah, it's funny because most navigation in the world is based on that assumption.
Yeah, perhaps. Might
Sometimes
explain a lot.
Sometimes
Look at the state of the world.
working, sometimes it's not. So it's confusing.
I mean, it's the difference between pragmatism and idealism. Pragmatism allows complete satisfaction because everything is always exactly the way it is. Whereas idealism is always slightly frustrating because actual situations will always diverge slightly from the ideal, even if you can get them to be very close.
Yeah, I find myself butting heads with idealists all the time.
Yeah, sure, of course. Idealism is basically a recipe for pain.
It's almost like I mean, it's coming from fear, it seems, most of the time.
Perhaps. I mean, everything comes from identification. Which when fear comes from identification.
Associating with the body.
Well, with anything, but with the body is a classic example. Identification is more profound than the usual use of the word where I'm identified with the body or I'm identified with something. It's not at basis. Identification is not I'm identified with, but I can identify anything as being any particular way. So identification is defining something, and everything is absolutely undefinable. So as soon as you define things, then you can orient to them. You can identify with them in the classic sense of I'm my body or I'm whatever. But you identify it, and then you're off and running, and then all of a sudden you live in a world where there's all these things that are certain ways. But the problem is none of that is actually true. If it was true, then that might be a great strategy, but it's always wrong because if you identify something as being a certain way, you're wrong because the thing itself, what it is unresolvable. Has actually been that way. In other words, no matter how ingenious and broad and subtle your definition of something, it will always have explicit characteristics that will be outside of that definition, an unlimited amount.
It seems like a Tibetic teaching they're all about resolving the identification with the body.
Yeah.
They don't really talk much about the appearances.
Yeah. Well, you know, the problem with you dissolve identification with the body and still have some other identifications of what you think is going on. You know, that some Advaita principles themselves are true in themselves in a certain way, whereas absolutely nothing is true in itself in any way. So, I mean, for absolute liberation, you have to be free of all identification. You have to see that nothing is any particular way.
And nowadays, if I read it, it's more light. It seems too prescriptive. I mean, a lot of the times they really emphasize it almost like a yogi kind of attitude of you have to constantly inquire. Which I think it's all a balancing act, but I find it useful to occasionally get reminded during the day. Like, what is this?
Sure.
Peter, just like there's no such thing as a shared experience, there's no such thing as boundaries.
Right.
And it's just another game to imagine, or to play as if there were decreasing boundaries, and some sort of agreement or something.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole thing about like boundaries and
You mean boundaries in a psychological sense?
no, I don't know. But like that's just a sort of performance of sort of self-indulgence. But
Well, what do you mean by boundaries specifically, or in any sense?
Okay, me imagining myself as a separate being having control over my subjective experience.
Right.
And wanting to maintain a certain level of comfort.
Right.
And interacting with other imagined beings, that decreases or increases of comfort.
Right. There's nothing wrong with trying to do that, but that's basically a game you're playing.
Yes. I can just feel such like resistance to, to how you're putting it.
In what way? What aspect of it do you resist? Look at it fight. Come on. Argue your side of it.
It's not like I can argue with it. It goes against long-standing habit,
Mm-hmm.
Long-standing complacent habit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way I approach it doesn't change anything. It's just seeing it what it actually is rather than seeing it in terms that it isn't. I mean, that's my argument. It's not like anything has changed or negated. The behavior is the same. The motivation is the same, but what it really is what it really is, as opposed to the terms we're used to thinking of it as being.
Yeah, there's something kind of upsetting, like there's an imagination continuing to play the game with given a certain context to it, or given certain terms,
Right.
that I would get something, or that there is something to get for this.
Well, you get something, you get the enjoyment of trying to have it the way you want it. I mean, which is what you already do. It's just seeing it that way. I mean, that's what I do. You know, I behave in a way that is an art. Behavior this whole apparent interpersonal behavior is an art form that, that by its very nature tends to or attempts to steer things into certain flavors, let's say. I mean, I could sit here and start insulting people, and that would steer things into a very different flavor than sitting here and being respectful and discussing ideas. So, but the question is not that action. The question is, what is it really? Yeah, it's not a matter of what happens, what you do or don't do. It's a matter of seeing what it is. All human behavior is absolutely fine. It's perfect just the way it is. But the point is, see what it actually is, and you will be free within that, as opposed to not seeing what it is and feeling stuck with the way you're feeling it to be.
What did you say?
What's that?
We're always stuck.
You're always stuck? What are you stuck
What
in?
did you just say?
Who's stuck in what? The truth is, everyone's stuckness is actually their absolute autonomy and freedom of doing exactly what they think they should be doing. Everyone's doing exactly what they want, even if they have enormous circumlocutions in their mind, arguing that they're stuck or constrained in some way.
And those constraints are a direct showing of liberation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Showing the what?
Liberation. I mean, that's how you become aware.
What?
What? Try to slip that one past me.
There is no other way.
You
Listen
are
to
the
Pink
way
Floyd.
you are. And
Like Popeye said it.
Yeah.
That way you experience.
And I should feel liberated because I'm doing exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And even though I find that what I have been used to as an operating system is changing rapidly.
Right?
And no longer providing this the, same kind of awareness.
But what you want to do may change. If you change what you want to do, it may change.
When I really want to hear something, I'm thinking off somewhere else. And it's like it's gone. And I feel like I can't be aware of what I want to be aware of.
Well, if it's gone, there's nothing there to be aware of.
Well,
What's there is only what's present. If it's not present, then you haven't lost anything.
well, I'm not necessarily interested in what happens to be present to what's happening with me. I'm more interested in what I was interested in, but suddenly I'm thinking off. And I'm not interested in that. And I could call that liberation, but I don't. I don't feel that is being liberated in terms of just accepting what is, or being what is.
But liberation, it doesn't mean acceptance. If you struggle with things, then that's what you want to do. You wouldn't struggle if you didn't want to. There has to be motivation there.
So then there's just acceptance. There's acceptance of what is.
Of course, there's a de facto acceptance of what is. Because what is what is. I mean, not if you didn't accept it, that would be what you would be wanting to do. If you want things to be different, then that's what you want to do. So you're completely liberated in you enacting what you're wanting to enact.
Instead of how you find things.
Not necessarily instead of. You struggling with it is also something you're finding the way things are. Find the way things are can have apparent conflict within it.
I'm not saying struggling, I'm just noticing it's like disappointed.
Yeah. Well, disappointment always comes from wanting things to be different than they are.
So,
And you're free to want that. So you're enacting you're liberated, you're enacting your desires by wanting them to be different than they are.
I'm just missing.
But none of that is what you think it is anyway, so.
Anything you're missing isn't really there. You're only thinking that it's there, so you're thinking you're missing it.
I think it's confusing when you say wanting because you're talking about the totality as you wanting, not you as the imagined one in a certain thought saying, I want this.
Well, they're the same thing. Desire is desire.
They are, but they're not. I mean, there's an implied I there that's
well,
not existent.
It may be being held to have all of that apparent structure of I, but actually desire is desire. So when desire appears spontaneously, and it's always true. So when desire appears, the desire is like a vector that wants to go there. And then you can have all sorts of circumlocutions and identify with that as your personality or this, that, or the other. But in actual fact, desire is just a transcendental, miraculous apparition, phenomena.
Yeah, let's say you're struggling right now and you're experiencing something, whatever,
Yeah.
at work, and then there's a thought that says, let's try and get away from that struggle. We
Sure.
should do A, B, or C. And
Sure.
so you can say, if I identify with that I and that thought, then I don't want to struggle. Because that's kind of what the narrative of that thought is.
Right.
Which is this, of course.
Right.
It's implying something that's not really there. And
Yeah, but you're free to do all that.
right, of course. But that freedom is not the freedom for the imagined I. That's the point.
No, the imagined I has no freedom.
Right.
The imagined I doesn't exist, so who cares?
Well, if we identify with the imagined I, then when you hear, oh, I want to do all this, you're like, well, I don't. I'm struggling.
Crazy that people kill each other in the name of ideas.
Crazy.
That's super crazy.
Yeah.
And some people, you can't even have this conversation without them getting hostile.
Sure.
That's pretty, that's very powerful.
Sure. There's probably places in the world where if you had this conversation, they would kill you.
Dude, yeah, I can see that for sure. 'Cause, yeah, it collapses everything.
Yeah.
Any type of security, any type of idea of how things are.
Well, it reveals the true security, so it's actually a big gain.
Oh, yeah. But at first, it could like be very scary
Sure.
because there's nothing really perceived. There's nothing really to hold on to.
Sure.
So that initial fear could be very profound for them.
Sure.
Well, I'm grateful that we could have a conversation in a beautiful house with beautiful people.
It's nice.
Without getting killed.
But if we were to get killed, the Uzi guy would come over.
Is the guy.
It is such a relief, like, that's okay too.
I guess I have like thinking about that. If fear comes up for me, big one is death. I still don't see that I'm beyond death and limitless. I'm not my body. There's a profound fear of dying. I'm in the process of dying with a lot of pain.
Right.
And gruesome.
But can you see that the fear of death is not the fear of death, it's the fear of your idea of what death is.
For sure. And sometimes
Look at that really closely.
But there are stories of, let's say, like someone getting mauled to death by a jaguar or a tiger. That seems like, that would be very difficult to be in that position.
Well, it's very easy for them to be in that position if they're being mauled by the tiger. It's effortless.
Yeah, but that going out.
But you don't know what that would be like. You see, you hear the story and you imagine what that would be like, and then your fantasy of that is horrific.
Yeah, well, like a little cut on my finger, it's kind of painful. So I could kind of that's pretty that's pretty terrifying.
But again, the terror is in the fantasy. It's not happening now.
No.
So you're imagining it happening, and then you're reacting to that imagination.
For sure, it's definitely there.
Yeah, but see the fact of that.
Yeah. Well, we don't know how we're gonna die.
Right.
That's one thing.
Yeah, and even when you're dying, you won't know how you're dying.
I mean, there's like certain events, perhaps. Sometimes, like maybe a car accident.
Well, but again, what you describe as a car accident is not a car accident. It's exactly whatever it happens to be,
Yeah,
which is uniquely itself.
for sure.
And you don't know what it is until it's happening. And even as it's happening, you don't know what it is.
It would be nice to come from that place. But like like what I'm supposing or projecting and my ideas
Right.
is that like, okay, so my is feeling tremendous amounts of pain, like tortured and like agony.
Yeah.
Like, just like super identified with my body or
Sure.
whatever it may be. I'm afraid that will happen, that I won't be like liberated in that instance. I will die in a very like narrowed vision of reality.
Right. Yeah.
That's definitely a possibility.
Well, it's not a possibility because that fantasy could never happen because what actually happens will be different than that fantasy.
Yeah, I gotta think of like the most gruesome one, and then everything else that doesn't have. Okay, it's not too bad.
There are meditation techniques of like focusing on the corpse that's decaying.
Sure. But decaying corpse is not so much the issue for most people. I think death is the issue.
Or even like being
After you're dead, you probably won't worry too much. As far as anyone knows.
Well, I used to like do these meditations where I meditate on getting mauled by wild animals and stuff.
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure.
It would stir up a lot, and then I don't know, stir up the kundalini. If it was useful. I don't know.
Well, how was your experience, Peter? You had like cancer, like throat cancer, or
Yeah, that's throat cancer.
like how like painful was that compared to your whole life? And you were like,
That was the most pain I've experienced.
Yeah.
Off
Did
and
you
on.
want it to die? Would you rather die than like have that pain?
Sometimes.
Yeah. And then up to the point, like, what would you say you recognize or realize reality as it is? Was that like towards the end of it?
Oh yeah, it was afterwards.
It was afterwards.
Well, afterwards in terms of the immediate symptoms, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Do you think your relationship to what was happening before you realized would be different if you realized as you had cancer?
Yes.
Yeah. What would be the difference?
I wouldn't be oriented to fantasies.
There'd be less pain, you think, involved?
Well, less suffering.
Less suffering.
Pain is a really interesting phenomenon. A great deal of the painfulness of pain, the suffering of pain, isn't in the sensation itself, it's in thoughts about the sensation. So you might be in, say you've got a lot of pain. So there's the sensation, and then there's also an ongoing narrative. Oh, this is horrible. I hate this. I don't want this to be happening to me. How would this be happening to me? I want to make it stop. And so there's all of this narration, and the narration is being reacted to, which is maybe experientially being lumped in with the sensation as being pain. But the sensation of pain without the narration is a very different thing than pain with all the narration.
I think I gotta accept the fact that I would die like a horrible, painful death with the narration going on and believing it to be true.
Well,
That's what I'm most afraid of.
Well, if you're almost afraid of it, then why accept it? Why not just say, no, I'm going to die in my sleep, and I'm not even going to know what happened?
That would be nice. I wouldn't mind that.
Well, if you're going to have fantasies, why not have that one?
Well, you gotta prepare for the worst, right?
But the fantasy isn't preparing for anything. The fantasy is just having fantasies and getting yourself all torqued up about nothing.
Okay, I'll think about cool that. I've thought about the painful one quite a bit.
The only time to think about death is when it's happening. Because then you'll know what to think about.
But I've read a lot of like the Buddhist texts, and they say contemplate on death. What a bit.
Sure.
You know, like at any moment you go out and drive or ride a motorcycle, that
Sure.
you can die. So having that in your mind, I think, is a powerful medicine.
Yes, but that's not about the pain or the experience. That's about cessation. That's about the fact that you lose anything at any moment. And more simply than that, you can look at, in fact, you do lose everything at every moment. At every moment, the entire past is gone forever. Everything you ever had is gone forever. Everything you've experienced is gone forever. All you have is this right here. Your childhood's gone. What you did yesterday is gone. It's gone. It's utterly gone. Just like when the moment you die, your life will be gone. But it's gone already. It's already gone.
So when death happens, it'll be gone in a way that yesterday is a little different.
No, exactly the same.
Is it?
Sure. Of course.
There's some differences for sure.
Well, we'll see. Well, talk to me about it after you know.
After you die.
Well, that's the only time you'll know. Anyway, it's about quitting time, so I'll knock off.